I'd like to start with a little bit about myself, and that's not because I want to talk about my own ego and all my achievements. It's because I came into all this sort of stuff quite young, and when I first came to realisation of my own nature, it wasn't so much about my sexuality, it was also about my style, my culture. As a kid I was quite camp, and in those days, in the 60s, queer was the commonly used word, and so I identified with that word straight off, rather than gay, which wasn't actually being used very commonly at all, if at all. I never heard it until after the legalisation of homosexuality in 67, or partial decriminalisation rather than legalisation. And by that time I was already out on the scene. I didn't like the scene in London very much, and I've lived in London most of my life now. I found the homosexual scene, as it were, very alienating, and to some extent that's continued, I think. And so I got into gay liberation quite quickly, in the very, very early 70s, almost straight away in London. And to me, the word liberation was as important as the word gay, for me personally, because it was about very much all that link with liberation struggles of women, black people, all that kind of thing that was going on there. And the big slogan then was the personal is political. So that's where I'm starting from. I'm telling you about my journey because my personal journey is also a political journey. And I got into Gay Liberation Front, and I found that the scene in the gay liberation scene in London was different in central London than it was for me in East London. And so we started, by the mid-70s, we started an East London Gay Liberation Front, and I was a founding member, and my address, my partner's address, and our shared address together was the postal address for the East London Gay Liberation Front. We linked up with the squat that was going on, the East London Gay Squat in Grevens Road in Stepney, although we actually lived there. And we formed quite a lot of actions around East London during the late 70s and into the 80s. And it was a very different scene, as I say, in East London than it was in central London. I don't want to go into all those differences, but if people want to talk about that later, feel free. But I kind of moved on from the gay liberation scene. I was finding aspects of that very helpful, very beneficial. We used to do things like consciousness raising groups and sort of awareness groups and things like that. I found that very beneficial to me, and because we were the postal address for Gay Liberation Front in East London, I found that I found a very early link to what was going on in America with the Radical Fairies. The Radical Fairies started about 78 in America, and they had a very different take, because by that time in America, as well as in this country, there was a big split in the gay movement. Generally, there were several splits, but one of them was the fact that a lot of the people on the scene tended to want to say, well, we're just like everybody else except that we have sex with people of the same gender. And we can be absorbed on that basis. We just need to change the law and we'll be absorbed into normative society. And that was sort of like the majority trend within both America and in this country. And what happened with the Radical Fairies was two different things, I suppose. One, they found that the gay movement was being very urban-based and not very close to nature and not very close to the sort of natural ways of living. And the other was that they rejected this, what they called the assimilationist view, that all we have to do is just like conform to normal society standards and we can fit in and people will just accept us and we just need a few changes of the law and it'll be all right, you know. And that has continued to be, I think, probably the majority of gay people's views in this country. And this is why I continue to call myself queer, because we started to identify queer as being a more radical alternative to that kind of approach. I don't reject the word gay, but I find increasingly it's becoming absorbed into this rather normative understanding of what it means. So I tend not to use it so much now. And that's not to be the people who find queer offensive. I can understand that some people did find that offensive. I would still like to reclaim it. Some people don't like to do that, but I feel really comfortable with it. I've never found it to be something to be ashamed of myself. I feel that being queer in the ordinary sense of the word, being a bit weird, being a bit different, being a bit not in the ordinary, is absolutely fitting for me because I identify with that as much as I do with my sexuality side of the term. And I think it's good for people to, most people have that in them, actually. It's not just about sexuality. Most people have a little corner of themselves where you feel you don't quite fit in. And I think that queer aspect of ourselves is something we should all be happy to reclaim as much as our sexuality, as much as our gender. And the other reason I like queer as a term is because lesbian, gay, bisexual define what we do with our sexuality, with our sexual attraction. Trans and intersex define what we do with our gender, identity. Queer, I think, encompasses all of those and more. It goes on to culture, it goes on to politics, it goes on to style, it goes on to other kinds of identity that aren't defined by those LGBTI norms. And I think I notice very commonly now that when people say it's an LGBT event, very often, if they're not identifying as a queer event, I can see very quickly that where people's heads are coming from, they haven't really understood or grasped yet the journey that we're on, or at least that some of us are on. I'm not saying everybody is. And as I said, I came to this through the Radical Fairies very soon. I went to America in 1980, very soon after the Radical Fairies had kind of identified themselves as being in existence. And I find that approach really satisfied me as a radical fairy. Unfortunately, I couldn't get that established in this country, and I kind of, although we did a little few things in London, it never really took off. We tried to get the gay press to talk about it, and they never did. We've got East London Gay Liberation Front mentioned a few times, but again, as the 80s wore on, gay culture, lesbian culture, the general culture of the mainstream movement became so absorbed with the commercial scene, the clubbing scene, that what we were trying to say was really swamped by everyone going out and getting off their heads and enjoying themselves, which is fine. But the other thing that happened was the mainstream gay community used to have, from the Campaign for Sexual Equality, which I was also kind of a member of, they formed the National Gay Community Association organisation, which had a massive network of supportive local groups all over the country, very strong in supporting isolated areas, in rural areas, in places where people were just maybe one or two on their own. And they voluntarily gave it up, which I think was a big mistake in terms of our movement in this country. They just gave up that whole national network of gay community organisations, which could have developed into something more grassroots and more supportive, and they just gave it away and said, oh, we don't need it anymore, we've got the clubs, we've got the law changed, that's all we need to do, and that's goodbye to all of that. I think with the commercial scene developing as it has now, people are using the internet more, a lot of our clubs are closing down, a lot of the acceptable places that we used to use are closing down. I think in some ways this represents an opportunity for us to regrow a grassroots queer movement, which is queer identified rather than accepting that we want to just be fitting into some kind of normative society. So I think for us here, I've noticed in the last few years lots of things have started to happen. I'm very pleased to be part of political campaign groups like ACT UP, which I've started getting back involved in again. I dropped out of it for many years. I've also started being involved with an East London group called Queer Space East, where we're talking with other community groups to try and set up a dedicated queer community space that we can have on a meanwhile lease for at least a few years. These meanwhile leases, it's a bit like this DIY space here, that we're talking with property developers, with commercial people, with the public sector. We're talking with them about getting access to these places on a more secure basis than squatting. Because it's very important, I think, for people who are queer identified, who may want a safe space. They don't necessarily want to come to somewhere where they might be threatened in a squatting situation where they might feel unsafe. So I think it's very important for us, for the security of our community members who are going through mental health problems, who are going through all sorts of issues. It's very important for us to find spaces that can be secure and where they can come to comfortably. And so these meanwhile leases, where we can be legally in charge of a space for a few years at least, and we can use these spaces to actually develop our community in a more grassroots way. One of the things that the fairies do is we do things called heart circles, and we do celebratory things called like drum circles and dressing up and dancing and things like that, and we do residential stuff. But we come from a point of view, as I say, this personalist political thing is very important, because I think a lot of political movements develop on the basis of we're angry, we're going to shout about it. That's fine, I'm not knocking that. But I think they burn out. People tend to, I've noticed this because I've been politically active in London since the 60s, and people can't sustain that through a lifetime. They need to have personal relationships. And very often what happens when personal relationships come along, people go off into their little couples or their little 2 or 3 supported groups, and in small groups, and they go through their own personal dramas, but the community is not aware of it, they're not being supported by the community. I think we're really going to be a real thriving, sustainable community, and this is where eco-queer comes in. Eco-queer isn't just about loving the earth, isn't just about loving how we are in relationship to the planet. It's about human ecology, and human ecology depends on love, depends on trust, depends on building personal relationships on a long-term basis, so you know that you've got the security, if you like, of a lifetime of a group, of a supportive group that will be there for you when your romantic things fall apart, when some personal disasters happen to you, when you get homeless, when you lose your job, whatever. You know there's a community there that is going to be supportive of you. And a lot of people within the queer community have various kinds of mental health issues, like the mainstream community. But those mental health issues are not well supported by the mainstream. I know this because I'm a mental health professional, and I know from the mental health professional side how difficult it is to get access to decent mental health and emotional support and care. It really is difficult to get that, even on an ordinary basis, but if you're queer identified as well, you really don't get the degree of understanding from the system that you need. So I think our queer community, if we're going to build it, and I hope we are, I think we are starting to, that needs to be a grassroots thing that sustains us in a very good, supportive way. Now, I'm very lucky. I've had a supportive family. I haven't had a lot of issues with my blood family about coming out. That's why I was able to come out quite young. And in fact, I'd like to share with you a song that my mother used to sing to me when I was, not just to me, but to my brother and sister and our whole family. And this is, I think, why I came to fairies very young. So, some of you may know it already because I've sang it with some of you come to fairy things. It goes, fairies, fairies, beautiful, bright and gay, singing, dancing till the break of day. Come along with the fairies, fairies, beautiful, bright and gay, singing, dancing till the break of day. And she used to sing that to me, and she used to call me fairy-like. She had no problems with that, with me being quite a camp kid, and prancing around and dressing up in all sorts of funny clothes, and then going on stage and performing all sorts of funny stuff. And she's been a wonderful supportive mother. She's 92 now, she's still around. My father was kind of less supportive, but still not particularly unsupportive. Unfortunately, he's dead now. And it came to be that I was going to sing another song, but I need the lyrics for this, because I wrote this one. It came that we developed more into kind of the ecological movement, and part of that really has been to reclaim sexuality with the earth. Now this is a very strange thing for a lot of people, but you may or may not know that there's quite a thriving eco-sexual movement that was started in California, or I think globally, by Annie Sprinkle and various of her cohorts. And this ecosexual movement says, let's not think of the earth as our mother, because some of us, not me, but some of us have rather difficult relationships with our mothers, and sometimes that gets in the way of this supportive relationship with the earth. Let's think of the earth as our lover. Let's treat the earth as we wish we would treat our most wonderful lover, somebody that we're really in love with, an entity that we really love and appreciate, want to shower our gratitude and feelings on, and that the earth reciprocates that. The earth wants to love us, the earth wants to support us. And we developed this loving relationship through the ecosexual movement. And some of the members of this ecosexual movement, they go out in nature, they make love to trees, they make love to the earth, they make love in nature, and they feel supported by that very dynamic energy. And if you've worked with energy stuff, and I do this as well as doing all the fancy queer stuff that I do, this is why I say I'm quite weird. I do a lot of this magical queer energy stuff, which really does get you into contact with stuff that is way beyond human consciousness and is really quite supportive of our lives. We are not just human beings, we're also animals that live on this earth. We're also connected to the plant energy of this planet and the trees and all this kind of thing. This is again why the fairies get back to nature, because we're very supported by this natural energy. So I'm going to finish this, before I do a little Q&A, I'm going to finish with this little song, before I take your questions, with this little song that I wrote just last month. And this was at one of our fairy gatherings, our most recent fairy gathering. We have usually 4 a year, some in Glastonbury, some in Northumberland, and any number in France where we have a piece of land, a mountainside that we own called Voltaire in the southeast of France. So we have these gatherings in nature, and at the last one that I went to, I wrote this song. Queer, queer, eco-queer, building community right here. Let's have some cuddles as we work through the muddles while we're liberating, loving, no fear. And we're loving the earth and the flowers and the bees, humans and animals and trees, clear flowing water, clean bright air, living ecologically with care. Queer, queer, eco-queer, building community right here. Let's have some cuddles as we work through the muddles, because we're liberating, loving, like right up here. Sorry, tongue twister. Whether tears or laughter as we work and play, we're loving our planet every day, raising our consciousness, becoming more aware of how to grow a paradise and share. Queer, queer, eco-queer, building community right here. Let's have some cuddles as we work through the muddles, as we're liberating, loving, no fear. And the no fear there is important, because as we're liberating, loving, we move through fear. And remember, the word courage comes from the French word cœur, meaning heart. And that heart energy, that courage, moves you through the fear, gives you the strength to really live life as we want to live it, not to be dictated to by powers that be, wherever they may be. So anyway, questions, comments, debates, anything you like. I'm happy to talk about any of those aspects.
I enjoyed your song.
Thank you.
First time I've heard it, but each other for some years. I must have missed it. It's good, yeah.
So future activities, do the fairies have this energy that you're talking about? What sort of like future plans?
Yeah, the fairies have a number of residential places in the world. The Radical Fairies are an international group. They have several residential communities in the United States, only one residential community in Europe, which is Voltaire, and that's not, people don't live there all year round because the winters are pretty severe there. It's near the Alps, so it gets snowed in the winter, so only a few people live there in the winter, and there's no permanent residents. But what we haven't got is a residential community in Britain yet. We do these 4 gatherings a year where we live together for about 2 weeks at a time, sometimes shorter. And that really builds our bonds together because you cook to eat. And one of the principles of the fairies is that no one's turned away for lack of funds. So even if you've got no money at all, you can come to those things. and join it. And we hope that the people with money will subsidise the thing enough to make it work. But what we're hoping to do is, I think for me, the project that's closest to my heart at the moment is we're hoping to find a piece of land somewhere probably in the Midlands so that it's accessible to all parts of the UK. And the Midlands covers a huge area, right from sort of south of Manchester and Sheffield right down to sort of Luton, you know, so anywhere in between there. We're hoping to find a piece of land, probably an old campsite or an old caravan site, so we've got permission to put a couple of caravans, and that hopefully we'll have that as something that we own permanently. We'll protect it under a community land trust so it can't be developed, and we'll have it permanently. Not as a residential community with a house, but somewhere where any one of us, any one of the queer community can go and camp, or just have a weekend away, or even longer if you want to camp there for the summer, the whole summer or whatever. Maybe start an organic garden or something like that. So that I'm hoping that we'll do that within the next 2 years. That's the project that's closest to my heart. So, yeah.
What are the heart circles? What happens?
Heart circles are a way of getting closer to each other. Fairies have no set leaders. I didn't emphasise that probably enough. So because there's no set leaders, there's no set way of doing things. Basically, the phrase goes, if you see a job that you think needs doing, do it yourself. Basically, so don't ask somebody else to do it, don't demand that it's done. If you think it's important, you gather the strength for it and do it yourself. Heart circles are our way of actually connecting with each other. It's so we don't have therapy leaders, but we have a space where any number of us from, I suppose the minimum for a heart circle would be about 3 people, and I've been to heart circles with 3 people and they're absolutely fine. The maximum could be, I mean, we've had heart circles with about up to 40, 50 people. That gets a little bit clumsy. Normally heart circles we have about 12 to 15, and we have them in London regularly, and in Brighton, and in Bristol, and in Nottingham, and I think they've had one in Wales and one in a couple in Scotland. But they're basically our way of coming together and just hearing what we've got to say. And it's a bit like a talking circle, a talisman's passed round, and we just have space to talk from our hearts, and we listen from the heart, which is the important thing. We listen without judgment as to what people are going through. With people, we share our joy, we share our pain, we share whatever we want to share. And you really have to experience it, and it's an experiential thing. And I find that the more people do it, the more people open up. And basically you're being heard, and we're there to hear each other, we're actually here to accept what each other have got to say. And then out of that kind of informs where we go with our planning, because then we know and respect and trust each other better to work together and plan together. Whatever else comes out of it, we can do that more easily, because we've shared more closely in the heart circles, and that enables our personal trust to grow, our personal love to grow. It's not the only form of talking that we do with each other, but it's in that way we find that we don't need to do a lot of dispute resolution or mediation or things like that a lot of groups go through. Conflict, virtually everything that human beings do, you go through some kind of conflict or disagreement. But because we do the heart circles, it cuts through a lot of that. We don't actually get to the stage where people are actually needing to have a conflict, because they can be heard within a heart circle environment to their heart's content as frequently as they want. So, but I think the best thing to do is to actually experience it rather than somebody talking about it, because they will be different on different occasions. Is that?
Yeah, no, I invited someone and I wasn't sure
what to do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else that anyone wants to raise? I'm very happy, by the way, through the day, if people want to talk about other things that we're doing. Myself and 3 of the other radical fairies are doing this thing called Queer Spirit Festival in Wiltshire. We're putting up our own money, it's all our own risk, and we'll probably lose money on it. I don't think we'll actually make money, but it's a not-for-profit thing anyway. So if you like camping, please do come. If you can't afford it, it's not actually being done on a fairy basis, but there are opportunities for people to volunteer to be crew. So please do talk to me about that if you want to during the day. And I've also got some of these cards with our email addresses and website addresses if you want those. And also the other thing I'd like to talk about with people informally during the day, if you want to, is just I've lived as a queer person in London right from the 60s. I've seen a lot of changes in London life, gay scene through that time, ups and downs of all sorts. And I think what we don't do enough as queer people is reflect on our queer history. And this is now like a 40 or 50 year journey for me, living in London. My next birthday I'll be 70, so I've been, and as I said, I came out quite young. So I've found that a lot of younger queer people just don't know what went on, you know, or they get it very second-hand from some other mediated source. And I think we don't talk enough about our queer history. It's something, perhaps because we don't have children, we're not passing on our culture in a way, and there was a whole generation of us lost to AIDS in the 80s and 90s. We're not really passing on our culture in a very sustainable way, and I think that it'll be informative for people. We don't need to reinvent the wheel if we really can talk a little bit more. I'm not the only one. I mean, please do share this with other people, but if you want to happy to talk about that during the day.
I've actually got a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what your opinions are on the commercialisation of the gay scene and how it does affect queers as a community, and especially people who identify as queer rather than
LGBT. Yeah. I think yes. I as a person, I struggled with that lesbian and gay bisexual scene very much. I wasn't very accepted in it. In fact, I've had lovers who are gay, but most of my long-term partners I found outside of the scene because I found the scene itself so alienating.
Yeah.
And as I say, I've been queer identified for a long time before it was sort of the current mode of using queer. So I think the fact that the scene is changing now, as I said earlier, is really an opportunity for us to find and create these queer scenes of our own, these DIY scenes. This is why I was very pleased to come to this DIY space, which is part of a wider DIY movement that I think, as queer people, we're not engaged with enough. I'm also engaged with the kind of festival scene, this kind of hippie scene, and I find a lot of queer people are very put off by that. They don't know how to engage with it. They're quite frightened of it because it's also quite chaotic, and those kind of people come from a very different culture very often. People are used to squatting and that alternatives type stuff. If I can put it, lesbian and gay people, sometimes we're not very familiar with that sort of scene. And I think this queer crossover is a really good opportunity for us to learn a lot of DIY skills that we don't normally get exposed to in the normal club culture, which is just about kind of getting out of your head a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You know? So, does that answer what you're...
I was saying, you said about like not passing on queer history. Do you feel like you see younger people kind of, it's like they're repeating the same mistakes all the time? Like it's like not learning from certain history of like how different groups interact together, and do you feel the same things just keep happening over and over again?
There are cycles. I don't like to think of it as repeating the same mistakes. I think that would be a misnomer, because I think as well as young people coming into the scene finding the same kind of things out that everybody goes through, they're also finding different things out because the culture around them has changed. I'm very aware that the modern culture is not the one that I grew up in, and I'm very out of touch with lots of stuff that's happening, and I have to really run to kind of keep up with a lot of the tech that's going on and stuff like that. So I wouldn't like to say I can tell you how to be to younger people coming up. That's not where I'm coming from. But I think it's just nourishing to hear that people have gone through experiences which may not be the same as yours, but which have some parallels. And I think that's good to share that with people, and it lessens the isolation, I think. But I don't think it's always exactly the same. I think
Yeah.
everybody's journey is slightly different anyway as individuals.
Yeah, I think because like each generation brings like new things that, but
Absolutely.
But I was just thinking, like I've noticed that, for example, like sometimes people think that there's like it's a new thing, it's been discovered or something, but actually it's something that's been going on the whole time.
Yeah.
It's just they didn't learn it from like a new like a new way of interacting or like being, I don't know, I can't think of a good example, but does that make sense? Like and then actually if they just known about the history, could have saved a lot of time with like all these kind of conflicts that happen within groups and things like that.
Yes. And especially people who just get it from books. I think, you know, I'm not knocking books, books are fine, but if you just get your queer history from books, you really haven't got it, you know, you need to get it from people who lived it, I think. Yes. But I think our queer history goes back a long, long way, you know, back into ancient times, back into tribal times, back into cultures that aren't Western cultures. And I think it's good to talk about all of that. There's a lot of room for just discussion about how culturally determined our queer identity is or isn't, you know, and how we can reshape it in whatever way we want to. So there's a lot of room for talk there and sharing. Anyone? Have I gone over my time?
No, you're actually perfect for tonight.
Okay.
Absolutely perfect. So thank you very much. It was really interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.